This is Uncommonly Remarkable, where we discuss the surprising everyday lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. My name is Artis Beatty. I am a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and the conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Today, I'm really excited to begin this season with a good friend of mine, Lennie Freidman. Not only do I normally just enjoy the conversations we have about any number of topics, I always take a little bit of perspective away from every conversation or talk that we have. He is currently the Chief Operating Officer for Vetovation Inc. Vetovation Inc. partners with human medical companies to bring innovative equipment and training to the veterinary market. We're going to talk about that because I think that's very interesting. But if you're a football fan and the name sounds familiar, it may be because he also had a lengthy NFL career. So everyone, please welcome Lennie to the show. Welcome, Lennie.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So, we had a little bit of conversation about the concept early on, and part of it was, for me, being truly an introvert. I don't spend a lot of time sharing how I think about things with people. I think I spend a little bit more time letting people pull those things out of me. But because I've now talked to a lot of people throughout my life and career, I've started to realize that there are really interesting perspectives out there. And I respect you as a leader, and you've given me a lot of pearls, things to think about. And so I wanted to bring you to the show to really spend some time with you, because I don't know that people understand some of the things that kind of shaped your life and your career, where you have been, and certainly not where you are today. So one of the things I asked before we even got started was for you to send me some things about how you thought about yourself. And I didn't give you any guidelines. I said, it's kind of important for people to understand a little bit about you before we get started. I didn't know what you were going to send me. And you sent me several words in sequence, and I think they are extremely meaningful. We're going to start with those things and talk about them. So I said, Lennie, tell me about yourself. And you said, husband, father, son, business leader, engaged member of life. Phenomenal. So let's take those things apart. So maybe we won't go in the sequence, but let's talk about each of those. Engaged member of life. Tell me a little bit about how you picked that phrase and why.
I think it's important that we all take active roles in our lives and in our communities. And what I mean by that is, too many times we allow ourselves to be passive watchers or actors in life. And I don't think that's how you're supposed to live life. I think you're supposed to be engaged with your family, your spouse, your kids, and your community. Be actively engaged in your career path and what you do that gives you meaning. Too many times I see people that are just counting the minutes and waiting for the days to fly by and eventually the lives to fly by. And that's not what we're meant to do. We're meant to be engaged.
I think that's very true. Time goes by very quickly. If you think back to when you were a kid, it took forever for a day to go past. It took forever for Christmas. And now things seem to go a lot faster. Now, granted, it's a smaller portion. Each day is a smaller portion of your total life, right? That makes sense. But you really start to realize how finite life is, and that if you're going to make an impact, you can't wait to make that impact. You've got to make that impact today, because you don't know for sure if you're going to be able to be here tomorrow to do the same thing. And each day you've got to kind of start fresh and think about how you're going to impact not just the people that you come in contact with, but even the people that those people come in contact with over time.
Exactly. And I would add to that, there's so much to life we don't know, and so much of our interests, and I'm going to use the term here, passion, but I want to get back to that, of our passions that we don't know until we try things and do things and figure out, I really don't want to go down this path because it's not that interesting. I want to go down this one. but you don't get to make those decisions if you're passive and you're not trying and not doing. And that's what I mean by being engaged.
I think when you think about your professional football career, anybody who is listening who doesn't really understand what it takes to be a professional athlete may not think about all of the intricate pieces of your upbringing, the dedication of time, the mental preparedness that brings you to that level. But what's fascinating for me is that in all the conversations that we have, that is a snippet of who you are. It's a snippet of your life. But there's a bunch of stuff before and after that you talk about a lot. And not knowing you, I would think, gosh, this guy has gone, he's played in the NFL, he's been a stellar athlete. That's it. And to know that there are all these other things really is interesting for me. So, one of the things that we talked about beforehand was really thinking about your upbringing. And I know that your parents have been a extremely big influence in the way you think about things and some of the things that you do and have done. So let's talk about them for a second, because outside of the things that I kind of know in the background, I think there's some other things that we can bring out. One thing that's fascinating for me is the fact that your parents had a camp that was really dedicated to children and children from varying backgrounds, but generally children who did not have necessarily great opportunity or may have been disadvantaged. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So dedicated to underprivileged children, at-risk youth, mostly from New York and New Jersey inner cities.
And was it a summer deal? Was it more than summer? Like, how did this work?
Yeah, they did year-round programs. So the summer camp was the biggest part of it. So I think 1,200 to 2,000 kids every summer. But they did year-round school enrichment programs. Example would be they went into, and I might be not exactly right on the cities, but Patterson, Newark, and New York City, and into select school districts and said, you give us your 5 toughest kids. And we're going to take them out of the school and bring them up to this very rural community in northern New Jersey and teach them on the one-to-one student-to-teacher ratio, get them out of some of the rough areas they're in, and show them different paths than they're currently seeing. And my parents did that for 35 years. They dedicated their life to that. I can only hope to have the impact on this world that they did.
So they had the camp. You were there. You spent time there with the other kids.
Oh, that was my life. Yeah. So I was there from the time I was 5 to 18. I went to summer camp every year. So basically when summer camp started, my parents were working 18, 19-hour days. And I was a camper, just like everyone else. When, I had a bunk, lived in the bunk with my bunk mates. Unlike the other campers, I went all 3 trips. So there was 3-week trips during the summer, and I went to every single one of them. From the time I was the youngest as a prep all the way through teens, did their leadership program. By the time I was old enough to work at camp, my high school athletic career was starting to take off, so I couldn't be a full-time camp counselor, but I was the low person on the totem pole in the camp kitchen, peeled lots of potatoes, worked for my parents in various roles. At the same time, my older sister was the head lifeguard. My brother was, until he got fired multiple times, was a camp truck driver. And my younger brother ended up following my parents' footsteps and not only became camp counselor, but was the assistant executive director at one point.
Wow. So there has to be some lesson in values that you picked up from participating and being around this all of your life, right? So if you could put it in a nutshell, like, what did you learn by experiencing what you experienced during those summer camps?
Ooh, a nutshell would be tough. I can talk through some of the most important lessons I've learned.
Sounds good.
So first being, kids are kids and people are people. And what I mean by that is some of the kids that went to camp were from some of the toughest, roughest backgrounds you can imagine in America as a, call it 9 to 16-year-old kid. From really rough areas in New York and Patterson and Newark, gang members, kids, that walked around with razor blades in their mouth, kids that had to walk through metal detectors in school, multiple kids that had family members killed, all those things that, you hear and read about and think about what it means to grow up really rough, were where a lot of these kids' backgrounds were. And yet you take them out of those backgrounds and you take those toughest of tough kids to, a no-frill summer camp in the middle of the woods, and you see how quickly kids revert to being kids. I remember going out, I can't remember, I was 9 or 12 or whatever it was, and going out for an overnight and had some of these really tough kids in my bunk, and went to an overnight, had a fire, woke up in the middle of the night, and we had a family of raccoons start like rummaging through our food. And I saw one of these really tough kids, the ones that would walk around with razor blades in their mouths for fighting, get on his hands and knees and start praying to God to save him. I mean, this is a physically tough kid that I want nothing to do with. They let their guards down, and you see kids for kids. And the reason I'm going down this path is it really forced on me the recognition that we're all the same. And, when you get put in different situations in your life, that really impacts how you develop.
It's amazing, right? Like, I think we've all had experiences where you really find out who you are based on that experience. To hear you talk about being in a camp, in a situation where you've got people who have this incredible shell that you would not think things would bother, that would be able to handle anything, turn into a normal person in that type of environment is incredible. It's incredible. Now, your parents had the camp, but that was really just kind of part of who they were, right? Because I think your parents were involved in a lot of things outside the camp, including some civil rights and other things that were going on, right?
Yeah, so my parents met in an organization called Vista in the 60s. And my parents were from the New York City area. My father grew up in Hillside, New Jersey. My mom grew up right around that area, but they didn't meet till they went to Vista. And Vista was an organization similar to the Peace Corps, but solely focused on the United States. And they went down south as part of this organization when they were in their early 20s to help break down Jim Crow laws, to help Black communities pass some of the tests they needed to pass to vote, which including some type of reading type litmus tests. So that's where they dedicated their lives. They marched with King in the 60s. That shaped their lives and also shaped them taking over this camp. Camp Camus is in New Jersey. It was founded, I believe, in the 30s for a camp for immigrant Jews coming from Ellis Island. That camp changed over time, and in the 1980s, when my parents took over, they really expanded the focus to all underprivileged kids, and I think quadrupled the amount of kids that were served during the summer camp, and increased all the traditional school year programs they did. So yeah, my parents did a lot of things outside of the camp before the camp, but the camp became their passion and their way of impacting the world, and they were working 80, 90-hour weeks. That's what they did, and that was their stamp on life.
And that's actually really, really powerful, right? So here you are, parents who were really looking at humanity in a way that during the time was not very popular, particularly here in southern U.S., right? Then taking that passion and pouring it into a camp that then grows to encompass maybe some of the very types of people that would have had problems in the South, just having to live in the Northeast, right? So you're spending time at the camp, they're spending time with these kids and still raising their own. So they've dedicated a lot of time now to other people's children. They're still raising you. And your dad, I think, is seeing as you're maturing, growing, that you've got this athletic ability. And I think we've talked a little bit before around, you have siblings. They weren't quite the same or at the same level as you. Talk about that a little bit, because I think your dad kind of identifying where you were early on, and then I'll say helping you develop that. Talk about that just a little bit.
First, to give a shout out to my parents, even as dedicated as they were to this camp, which they were, I don't think they ever missed a high school game, college game. I mean, my dad coached umpteen teams of mine and my younger brothers. He didn't coach my older brothers. My older brother just didn't love sports. And, that was unfortunate for him. He was born a midget. He was only 5'10". So, when I came around, and my older sister wasn't really into sports either. She didn't, just never was a passion of hers. When I came around, I mean, I was big from the time I was born. Right? I was a big kid. I wasn't massive by some of the standards of people in the NFL, but I was always, one of the biggest kids in my school, one of the biggest kids on my team. And growing up, I did have a great passion for sports. I love sports. And I didn't know if that was purely me or purely because my dad loved sports and I saw that in him. My dad played college basketball at Wagner, which was a D1 school in New York. So I have a lot of the size from my dad. He's tall, but he's, very narrow. So I got my width from my mom, as she likes to say. But yeah, so my dad loved sports and certainly encouraged me and my younger brother to play a lot of sports. And my true love at the time was basketball. I mean, growing up, I loved basketball. My dad played college ball. I spent most of my time playing college ball. And at camp, a lot of the kids played ball. So like basketball was what I looked forward to. And one of the camp counselors started as a camper. His mom worked in the kitchen, and he became a camp counselor. And I would say unofficially adopted by my parents. And he became another big brother to me. His name was Craig Maynor. His name is Craig Maynor. And we played basketball hours and hours. And he was a good basketball player. And I just loved it. So my dad taught me how to play quote unquote basketball. Craig taught me how to play street ball.
Okay.
And just loved it. And played every day, was one of the best basketball players in my small town, played every day through 7th, 8th grade, played a little bit of football, but not much. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but my passion was basketball. And I had the great honor of being invited to play for an AAU team in Paterson, New Jersey. And Paterson, New Jersey is not a small town like West Milford. And Paterson, New Jersey is a, city of, 150,000, 200,000 people that is known for basketball. So as I'm going down to play on this AAU team, which is, I think for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, my dad's driving me down, and my dad was always very encouraging. But I'll never forget this conversation because it really impacted my thought process. And he said, son, you're about to find out the difference between being good for West Milford and being good. And I went to this AAU team, and we had a future all-pro NBA basketball player on the team, first-round draft pick. And I was one of the best basketball players in my little town. I go down to Paterson, New Jersey, and I was a joke. And I was getting dunked on by kids in 7th grade. And I was still a big athletic kid,
Right.
And still from my town, one of the best basketball players. I came to the realization there that while I love this sport, I am not athletically gifted enough to play with the best. And that started focusing me well. I really like sports. I don't mind putting in the time. I like the competitiveness. I like the striving for victories and all that. But clearly, no matter what I do, I'm never going to be as good as some of these kids.
So that is perspective, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think about me, so not a sports ball person of any sort, right? Spent my childhood, young adulthood, avoiding all things that required any sort of athletic prowess. I can picture myself saying, wow, I'm not good at this. There are people who are just much better at this, and that's where I would stop. You look at it and say, I'm decent at this, but I'm not going to be great. I'm going to pivot to something that I can be great in. That's a different thought process. And it really does point to really some of the things that your parents had instilled, but also just kind of thinking about being able to put yourself into the right perspective and mindset around what you're able to accomplish and what you want to be able to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think that's where some of the worst advice that I hear, and I hear it a lot, is, oh, just follow your passion. Well, that's all fine and great, but if you're passionate about something you're not very good at, what does that do for you?
Yeah.
Right. So I think you need to give, and I'm going to get on a soapbox a little bit, but I think you need to give people a bit more perspective. And I talk to, I talk to my own kids, or I talk to other kids or other business people. Following your passion only makes sense if you have a talent for what you're passionate about. Right. So I could have followed my passion in basketball, and it wasn't even close to how much I enjoyed basketball versus football. I barely thought about football. Basketball was my passion. If I would have followed my passion, it would have ended as a very average high school basketball player. So when you're thinking about whether it's, as immaterial as sports or as important as career choices, think more than just about your passion. Think about what you have an aptitude for and how you could turn that into success, however you determine success to be.
That's an incredible thought, right? Because you're right. You hear follow your passion. You should follow your passion quite a bit, but it's really the combination of aptitude and passion that really get you past just the opportunity to become successful. And so I love that. I mean, I think it's a thought that should be shared more broadly, and more people should think about it that way, because lots of us have talents and we are passionate about our talent, but we don't necessarily pursue that, maybe because there are other things that provide more instant gratification or safer things to do. But trying to pursue a passion without aptitude or talent, it pushes you against a wall, and it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to be successful there. And you may miss out on really the thing that is what you are really designed or meant to do.
So I don't know how much of all of us are designed or meant to do anything. I think it's truly about, and it's hard to tell young people this, but have the end in mind, right? Like, what type of life are you trying to set up? What provides satisfaction to you? And if your end goal is to live in a nice big house in an expensive city and travel the world, then you better make career decisions that allow for that. Or if you have a different mindset, and I've got a great friend who has this mindset, he says, you know what? I want to be left the heck alone. I want to be able to walk outside my door and keep walking for days if I need to, without worrying about whether I'm trespassing or going into someone's park. And if I want to hunt off the land, I want to be able to do that. So he set his life up based on that, lived where he wanted to live based on that, set his career up based on that. Making $1 million and working on Wall Street doesn't get him that, so he didn't choose that path. I think people really need to think about that when they're thinking about life. What do you want? What is your end game? And regardless of your passion, what skill sets do you have that can get you there?
Yeah. Now, you're really young to be able to have thought about that in that context, right? But in that moment, you started to make a pivot and understand that maybe I should look at football rather than basketball. And that really truly did lead you down a different path.
I didn't think about all that then, for sure. So I don't want anyone to think that was going through my mind. What was going through my mind then is, I don't want to be just good at something. I want to be really good at something, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to put a lot of time and effort in to be okay. I was going to have to put a lot of time and effort into basketball to just be okay. So I saw an opportunity where, you know what, I can be better than okay in football. So yes, I wasn't thinking in those terms when I was that age, but I was thinking in terms of screw my passion. Where can I really have a significant impact?
Yeah.
And that wasn't going to be basketball.
And so begins the football career.
Correct.
And now your dad having been more of a basketball guy, but he was really into sports in general. Did he support your transition? And what did he think about you making the shift from basketball to football?
Oh, I would say he was more of the mindset that I just described, right? So he could look at it and say, and he said this, like, you're a good athlete, but your skill set is going to be better served in certain positions. And, you know, he never said you're not going to be good enough in basketball, but he certainly said, you know what? Football is going to be where you're going to have a better chance to be really good. They were 100% supportive in everything I did. Love sports and certainly weren't pushing for me. At no point in my high school career was the thought of the NFL in there. And the high school career was, you're a pretty good high school football player. Hey, you know what? You got a chance to play in college and maybe get a good education from your sport. And that was all we got to with football. And that took to my senior year.
Really?
Mm.
Now, you also did track and field in there too, didn't you?
Yes. And I also did basketball.
Okay.
So I did basketball, I think, through my junior year. And I was a very good rebounder. I was, a 280-pound man in a run and gun offense. It wasn't built for me, but I did some good things well. I was a good defender, good rebounder coming off the bench. Wasn't even a starter. But then, I transitioned to track and field because by the time I became a junior, so I'll back this up because you'll like this story. My sophomore year, I was about 225 pounds.
Okay.
So about the same as I was as a freshman, actually, about my height now, 225, and had a really good high school coaches.
Okay.
Just really good. And I don't mean that. I mean that by the important thing, meaning they cared for their ball players. They were good coaches, knew X's and O's, but they cared for their ball players more than winning and losing, and more than saying they got kids into college. But I had an old school head coach, Coach Harding, who I love to death, and still in contact with him, and Tim Gillen and Sean Poppy, and great coaches. But he said he had a bit of an old school mindset, and he said, "Look, you're a big kid, but if you want a chance to play in college, you've got to be a 285-pound offensive lineman, not a 225-pound offensive lineman."
And so
Sophomore year,
just to put it in perspective, though, so you're 6'3", maybe
6'4", a good day.
Okay, so between 6'3" and 6'4",
Yep.
We'll say 6'3" in high school, right?
Okay.
And you have to think about being 6'3" and 225 pounds versus 6'3"-ish, 4-ish, and 280 pounds.
Yeah. So he said, if you want to think about playing on the next level, you got to be 285 pounds. And to me, who was competitive and wanted to be good, I took that as a challenge. So I literally went from 225 my sophomore year to 285 by the start of my junior year, with a lot of help from Taco Bell. And it wasn't a pretty sight, artist. And I've still got the love handles today to prove it. But I became 285. And
Wow.
It wasn't a healthy 285, and it wasn't an overly athletic 285, but it did now put me on the radar of schools because I passed the eyeball test, right? So now I'm 6'3 and a half, 6'4", 285 pounds, and that does get you on the radar. Where if you're 225,
Nobody's looking.
Unless you're a tight end,
Yeah.
it's irrelevant. And I wasn't athletic enough to be a tight end.
So I can only imagine Taco Bell. It's when we were growing up, Taco Bell was the place to be if you wanted instant food that was kind of okay, but there's a lot of calories in it. I just can't imagine deciding, you know what, I'm going to gain 60 pounds over the course of that period of time.
It's just a few months.
And then be able to carry that around and still be able to be at least athletic enough with it to positively demonstrate my skill for the sport.
Yeah, so Taco Bell offered 10 and 20-pack tacos.
I remember those. They were meant for parties. They were not meant for just you.
They were meant for just me. And there was all-you-can-eat buffets at Sizzler. I don't know if you guys had Sizzler in North Carolina.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's what it was. And it was sloppy. And I was, fortune smiles down at you, I was still a good athlete because of basketball. I grew up playing basketball. So I had good footwork, and that's what carried me when I had to carry 285. And so I was 285. I was big. I was still a decent athlete for 285 pounds. And in high school at 285, you're just so much bigger than everybody else.
Yeah.
That, at that point, if I just touched people, they were going to fall. So got me on the radar, but on the radar of select schools. They just had college football playoff committee come out, and the University of Michigan, Alabama, Washington, and Texas are all now in college football playoffs. Not a single one of them would have looked at me in high school. But the schools that did look at me, because not only was I a big kid, not quite the great D1 college level athlete, but a big kid who had good grades, I was recruited by all the Ivy Leagues up in the Northeast and some academic D1 football schools, Northwestern, Duke, Wake Forest, Rice, Stanford, those type of schools.
And ultimately, you had to pick one. And that kind of started your trip down south, right? So talk about college.
Well, in the view of just how life unfolds, I boiled down my college choice to Duke and Northwestern.
Yeah.
And Northwestern just came off of like a 0-11 season, and Duke just went 8-4. And I said, well, I don't see Northwestern being any good. I'm going to go to Duke. Because they are two very similar academic schools. And I think at Duke, I won 9 games in 4 years. And within 2 years, Northwestern went to the Rose Bowl. So you never know. You never know at the time.
It's funny how you frame that, right? Because I was in college at the exact same time. And when you're in college, you pay more attention to just college sports, right? And so I was down the street up the road in Chapel Hill at UNC, but you kind of pay attention to where teams are. And I had really never spent any time from a football perspective or a basketball perspective really watching or paying attention to college sports. But I knew where Duke was during the time that I was at Carolina. And surprisingly, I knew a little bit about other schools, including Northwestern. So the fact that you were picking between the two, and during our college career, one of them did very well and one of them did not. It's just interesting how things play out, considering those were your two choices.
Exactly right. And shows how little we have the ability to predict.
Yeah.
Accurately.
Yeah. So you're at Duke, you're playing football, but you're also pursuing a bachelor's, right? And I think it's psychology.
So my major was psychology,
Okay.
but I was on a pre-med track.
Okay. Which is interesting, given your sister's career. I never actually drew the parallel between your sister's interest and where you were.
And very, very related. So my parents were social workers. My sister became a psychologist. Had a lot of respect for my sister. Very smart. Talked to her a lot, and certainly that impacted my thought process. But my career goal was to become a doctor.
And so obviously that's not where you landed, although you, in a roundabout way, you're doing some things now that are cross-related, right? So it feels like, we talked about your pre-college life, kind of getting the foundation, that transition from basketball to football, some of the things that went through the young Lennie's mind, then the ultimate transformation, you decide, you commit. You're like, I'm gonna put on this weight. I'm gonna train. I'm gonna get noticed. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna play college football. Are there experiences during your time at Duke that made you think any differently about football and where it was going to take you? I mean, you kind of went into it thinking, I'm going to be a medical doctor. It couldn't be a surprise that you were good enough to go into the NFL. Like, when did it start to materialize for you that maybe you would be pausing the thought around becoming a doctor and focusing on a career that would lead you to a professional football career?
Not until well into my senior year.
Really?
So it was a huge surprise.
Wow.
when Duke University offered me a scholarship, part of me chuckled like, if they're going to give me a scholarship to play football, great. I'm probably going to go there and sit on the bench for 4 years, but I'm going to go to med school. I'm going to have a great degree and fantastic. There's no point up until my senior year that I really thought the NFL was possible, nor was it a goal. The NFL was not a goal. Like, I wasn't going to college to play in the NFL. I wasn't training to play in the NFL. I went to college to get a good degree, to go to med school. They were paying me to play football, and if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, and that's it. So as a freshman, I remember going, and most freshmen probably have this experience, where as a freshman, you're 17 or 18 years old, you're most likely the biggest and best in your high school and any of the teams you play, and then all of a sudden you go to college, and now at minimum you're amongst equals.
Mm-hmm.
And more likely than not, you're going against big, strong men that have had 4 years of development that are more prepared than you are. And I remember going into training camp and got hit a few times, and I was like, holy. That was a major moment, because there are times where you have to make a decision and you say, okay, this is going to be hard.
Yeah.
Do I want to do what it takes to be good, or just do what it takes to survive?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't mean survive in the true sense of the word survive, but survive like, do I just want to be good enough to make it on the team and never play? Or do I want to do everything I can to be good?
It's interesting that you talk about that first experience, right? Like, I think we've all had that experience where you were really good at something, or overly decent at it, maybe the best around in that thing, until you go and meet other people who've been doing that thing for a while and realize, oh, I am average at best, or there are a lot of these people who are much better at this thing than I am. And for me, it was academics, right? That was from a high school perspective. It always came extraordinarily easy, and it was not challenging. And so you walk into your first giant lecture, and you sit down. You're like, oh, I'm in here with 100, 200 people. I might not be the best, but I'm probably going to be better than 98 of this 100 people, right? And first test comes around, and you realize, well, there's a lot of people who did much better than I did. It's a surprise, and it's a shock, and it can happen not just from an athletic perspective, but really from any perspective. And I think that's relatable for a lot of folks. I am actually a little bit surprised that to hear you say it about about the football perspective, but then you think you were also playing with people who had been on campus or had been playing for longer in the college setting too. And so they'd actually had some experiences that you would not have yet had, which makes a big difference.
Yes. And I hate to use a corny phrase, but steel sharpens steel. Iron sharpens iron, right? So if you're not pushed, and I hope the story you said is relatable to everybody in their life for something. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they're not really pushing themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're not pushed, if you don't challenge yourself against others that have the same goals and experiences, then you really don't know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's a sport or a hobby or academics or anything. Like, don't you want to know?
That is a fantastic point, right? If you've never had that experience, you've probably not pushed yourself enough. Wow. We're now in the thick of it. We're playing in college football. You're at Duke. We get to senior year, and now I'm curious because it was a surprise. So talk about the space that kind of led up to, I guess, understanding that the NFL was a possibility and the draft. Because if you didn't come in thinking this is what I'm going to do, you were still being the best you could be at the sport, which is in itself preparation, right? And so talk about that piece, though, when you started to realize that this was going to be a real possibility for you.
Yeah, so there's a huge story that needs to be told prior to that.
Okay.
So Most athletes come into D1 and they're redshirted, which means you get an extra year of eligibility. So as a freshman, you come in and they say, you know what, you're an 18-year-old, you're not ready to play, we're going to redshirt you, and then you're going to have 4 years of eligibility after. For whatever reason, the coaches thought that I was ready to at least be a backup and help them play as a freshman, so I wasn't redshirted. I didn't play that much as a freshman, but I didn't get that year. Sophomore year, I became the starting guard. Actually, I started the season as a tackle against Florida State when they had like 3 or 4 first-round draft picks on D-line. And that was the last game I ever started as a tackle. And they moved me to guard.
Okay.
So I started all sophomore year as a guard and admittedly did not play very well. And the head coach brought me in at the end of my sophomore year. Now, remember, I only have 3 years of eligibility because I played as a freshman.
Right.
So brought me in at the end of my sophomore year and said, you know what? We're going to go a different direction next year. We don't think you're really good enough to play D1 football. So this was the head coach at Duke.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So when you say I never had NFL on the mind, no, I didn't have NFL on the mind. I was thinking, could I even start in D1? I mean, that's a pretty harsh statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So at that point, I was like, well, I might not be good enough to play in D1. That really put me in the tank. And I made a decision, and I've had to make the decision a few times in my life. And I said, you know, maybe I'm not good enough to play D1. But what I won't let determine that is my effort. So I'm going into this year, and I'm going to be in the best shape, the biggest and strongest, the most dedicated athlete I could be to see where this goes. Because as part of that comment that the head coach made, he said, I just don't think you're tough enough. Like, I don't know if you're physically tough enough to play at this level.
Wow. Okay.
So I said, okay, well, we're going to find out then. And maybe I'm not. Maybe he's right. But I'm not going to look at my 4-year college career and say, I didn't put everything on the line to find out. So dedicated myself more than I ever have. Training, I don't think I missed a training off-season or regular season in college, period. Not 1 year or 2 year, period. Never missed practice. I think I might have missed one my senior year the last week. So going into my junior year, another really important thing happened. Got a new offensive line coach. Name was Joe Delisandris.
Okay.
Joe Delisandris was a college football player himself. I think played in the CFL, coached in the CFL, probably in his mid-40s at that time. And he was an old school, from Pittsburgh, first generation, dad worked in the steel mills type guy. And he came in day one and he said, I've met with the head coach. I've seen your films. The head coach told me who he thinks the starters are. I don't give a fuck. I'm going to see what you can do for me. And that was powerful. He's one of my favorite. He is my favorite coach. Still speak to him today. I think he's been the head offensive line coach of Baltimore Ravens for the past 10 or 12 years. Great man.
Wow.
Just great man. So junior year, I wasn't even the starter then. So I was splitting time with a buddy of mine for offensive guard. And Delisandris said, okay, we're going to split time. First game's coming up against the University of Maryland, I believe it was at the time. And he said, the starter will be determined by this game.
Okay.
So at the end of that game, after film, Delisandris comes up to me, and I don't know the exact words, but he said, if you're going to play like that, you're never going to sit your bench again. And so then I became the starter as a junior. End of my junior year, I wasn't all ACC. I don't even think I was all academic ACC, and I was a pretty good student. So I was still nothing special, but had a great coach. Team was a great team in terms of friends and teammates. We weren't winning a ton of games yet, but was very happy with the turnaround that I created in myself. And same thing I said my senior year. There was no inclination of NFL. But I was like, I got 1 year left. And then I'm going to go to med school. And then this is my last time ever playing football. I'm going to be the best I can be. That's it.
Wow.
Not all ACC, not going to make the NFL. I'm just going to be the best I can be. Period.
But there were I think in your list of things that were accolades, you did end up all ACC offensive lineman in your senior year. Is that right?
Senior year.
Wow.
And I'm a junior year.
Wow.
I was still relatively unknown. Not relatively, I was very unknown. There was no one at the end of my junior year that was predicting me as a draft pick, that was saying I'm NFL material. That just still wasn't on the radar. My senior year, some of this is speculation.
Okay.
But we had a kid on the team by the name of Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan's father was a very famous coach in the NFL named Mike Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan is now the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers and considered one of the best coaches in the NFL. So not only was his father considered one of the best coaches of the NFL, Kyle Shanahan is also now considered one of the best coaches in the NFL. And this is speculation, but I've heard enough comments. I think from Mike Shanahan coming to watch Kyle play that maybe I caught his attention and, that was enough. A head coach in the NFL says, you know what, let's give this guy, let's get this guy on the radar. Then I got on the radar from scouts, and I was invited to the Senior Bowl my senior year. The Senior Bowl is the all-star game of college football. It is the best college football players from around the country. There's lots of all-star games, college games after the season that are for potential athletes, NFL athletes, but the Senior Bowl is number one, hands down. And I got an invitation to that, which is a shocker.
Wow.
And I still think Mike Shanahan or somehow he put me on the list of scouts. And they said, we want to see this guy play outside of Duke. We want to see him play against the best. So I go to the Senior Bowl, and the head coaching team is, the way the Senior Bowl works is the two teams that didn't make the NFL Super Bowl the year before.
Okay.
Those coaching staffs are coaching the two teams in the Senior Bowl. There's a North team and a South team in the Senior Bowl.
Got it.
So the head coach was the former coach of the Oakland Raiders, and the offensive line coach was his offensive line coach. And we all go there the first day. We all get, meet our coaches and get introduced. And the offensive line coach says, "Who are you?" I said, "Coach, Lennie Freidman, Duke University." And he looks at me and goes, "Son, I didn't even know Duke had a football team." He said, "You are ranked number 20 of 20 offensive linemen on this team right now." That's it. He was just being straight. He wasn't like denigrating me. He was just like, "I don't know who you are. I've never heard of you. Didn't even know your school had a football team." So that's where I was. And I went to the Senior Bowl the same way I went to Duke. I was like, well, they're probably nuts for inviting me here, but let's see where it goes.
Yeah.
And the Senior Bowl, during the Senior Bowl, we had a couple injuries.
Okay.
And the offensive line coach, Bill Callahan was his name, comes up to me and says, "Have you ever played center?" I said, "Nope, just guard." He goes, "Well, you're playing center now." So he put me at center, and the big part of the Senior Bowl is not the game itself, it's the practices. Because during the practices, you have all coaches from around the NFL, the head coaches. And I would throw names out there that'll be irrelevant to you, but Mike Ditka, Mike Shanahan, Bill Parcells, they're all there watching. And they're watching.
I know these names.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'm proud of you. And they're watching you do one-on-one drills, pass protecting against, the best in the country. The Senior Bowl is the best in the country. So I started playing there and doing pretty well and started getting attention. And then went to the Senior Bowl and had to play guys like Booger McFarland. And Booger McFarland is a big-time personality now on TV, had a great NFL career, and played well against Booger McFarland in the Senior Bowl. So all of a sudden, Bill Callahan says, "You know what? You might not be the 20th ranked lineman after all." So my stock started rising, and then got invited to the NFL Combine. The NFL Combine is the top 300 football players in the country.
Oh yeah.
So again, I'm proud of you for knowing that. That's great stuff. So got invited to the NFL Combine, and the NFL Combine is a little bit of a beauty pageant where the coaches are just there to see you. And what I mean beauty pageant, they literally strip you down to your underwear and look at you. So it is a beauty pageant.
Wow.
But it's also a way for coaches to get to know a little bit more about who you are. So if they're interested in you, they interview you. They give you psychological tests. The combine is known for its physical tests. And, the physical tests are a little bit overrated in terms of they're really looking only for two things. They're looking for someone who's exceptional, meaning if you're exceptional at something, your stock might rise, or if you're awful, right? If you're expected to do between X and Y and you're nowhere even close, then that could hurt you. And the best, like superstars often don't even go to the combine. Like if you're truly like if you're a top 5 pick, you're like, there's nothing I can do there but hurt myself. So often those guys don't go. And a lot of guys go there and think they're going to hurt their stock. So they'll selectively choose not to do certain things. So if you're a big time offensive lineman, but you don't have a good 40 time, you might say, you know what, I'm not going to run the 40. You guys see how I play. I'm not going to do it. A lot of guys do that.
That's so interesting to hear because limited sports ball knowledge, right? But combine I kind of know about, at least the physical side, because that's the part you see on TV. It's the part that's been part of movies. And, my assumption was, here are the required things. Everybody that's here, do all the required things, and let's see how you stack up. Not knowing that maybe some people decide, that's not going to be the thing that I do. Because it could ultimately damage my position. But what's really now got me curious is the parallel you draw to it being a beauty pageant, but also the mental testing, the psychological testing that goes on kind of as you go through this, right? Because you're going now to, for all intents and purposes, an exhibition, and you've got your physical prowess as something that's got to be looked at. It's got to be on display. But they also, now new to me, now understanding, want to know if you're going to be able to handle it if you are part of the league, right? And so that's a lot of pressure for someone who is coming out of a college career, maybe consciously making the decision it's NFL or bust, right? Versus someone who has alternatives because you've done all of the academic work. You weren't really on that path to start like that. It seems to me that would be an environment that would be extremely difficult to perform well in.
Oh, there's high pressure, especially to use non-lineman examples. I mean, if you're a wide receiver and you're known as a speedy wide, a fast wide receiver, that 40 time can make or break you. Right. So if you run a 4.3, you're a stud. If you run a 4.6 as a wide receiver, so 4.3 versus 4.6, I mean, that's pretty hard to differentiate. That could tank your draft pick. So yeah, there's a ton of pressure. Just because you alluded to it, I'll agree. I had no pressure because I never thought I was going to be here, and this is all upside. There's no downside.
Right.
There's no downside.
Wow.
There's no downside. The psychological tests were hilarious. Like they were funny. So each team had their own. So there was one standard called the Wonderlic test.
Yeah. Okay.
There's one standard called the Wonderlic test. But you take that before you go there. That's all eligible seniors who want to go to the NFL. At least when I played, had to take that. But then each team that is interested in you has their own psychological tests. I mean, some are, pretty simple things you've done before. Some are just ridiculous and silly. The Giants had like a 300 question test.
What?
300 question. And I think they asked me if I wanted to be a clown like 7 times in that test. Yeah, it was weird.
So you go and I mean, it's kind of like we know what the outcome must have been, but how did you do during the process? Understanding that, maybe your motivation was there because you're always looking to excel in whatever you do, but the pressure that you were facing was not the same pressure that someone who'd put all the eggs in the basket had.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, the combine is there to look at exceptional good or exceptional bad. Otherwise, you're good enough, right? So I did fine, and I mean that intentionally, right? I
Yeah.
didn't do anything off the charts, but I did nothing that was a negative. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples in one story, and this is a story of how you can hurt yourself. So for linemen, one of the most important tests is the 225-pound bench test. So everybody at the combine, and I really do think everybody, even quarterbacks, do a 225-pound bench test for reps.
Okay.
And, as a lineman, you want to be somewhere in the mid-20s is fine. If you're below the mid-20s, that's a pretty red flag. Like, you should be able to do mid-20s. If you do plus 30 or plus 40, now you're in that exceptional range where, like, you could have been an okay lineman, but, wow, this guy's really strong, like off the chart strong. Not that their college coach is telling us this, but we put him on a bench test like everybody else. So I was about to do this test and just happened to be sitting next to Bill Callahan, my offensive line coach at the Senior Bowl. And I was also sitting next to an offensive lineman from ECU, East Carolina University. And he asked us both, he said, what do you guys think you're going to do? And the ECU kid said, oh, I should do about 28, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, it's not exceptional, but it's pretty good. And I said, somewhere between 24 and 26. If I do less than 24, I'll be disappointed. This is exactly what I said. If I do less than 24, I'll be disappointed. If I do 26, I'll be shocked. Because, going in what you do.
Yeah.
You've been, if you haven't been practicing
before.
this, you're out of your mind. So the kid who said he'd do 28 did 19.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And I did 25. Like, literally
Right
between 24
where you want
and
it to be.
26.
Yeah.
So Bill Callahan pulls me aside afterwards, and he goes, that's great. That's good enough, right? Not exceptional, not bad. That's strong enough, pass all the hurdles. But then he also says, and I can never trust that kid ever again.
Yeah.
Because how could I trust when you come off the field and I want to know what's going on out there and you just got your ass kicked, I want you to be able to tell me that so I know, okay, do you need help? Do we need, I'm never going to be able to trust what this kid just told me coming off the field. That's a problem.
Yeah. And you're so right, because there's no way he had not prepared for this. And I'm not prepared for anything, but if you ask me at 225 how many I can do, I'm going to be within a rep or two, because you do know where you should land, and you're not gonna come out with adrenaline and get 10 more reps, right?
No.
You may get an extra one because of the situation,
Maybe an extra one,
but you're not going to come out and just outdo what you normally do.
Physically
right?
impossible.
Yeah.
You've been training for this.
Yeah. That's an incredible point.
Oh, and that's, your word is really, your word, your integrity. These coaches want to know if they can trust you.
Yeah. Obviously, he wasn't thinking about that, right? As part of his go forward image is now, what else is this guy not going to be truthful about, right? But that's a lesson learned for all of us, though, right? Because in all the things that we do have some measure of our capability or some measure of outcome. And if you're not honest with yourself about where those limits are, it makes it impossible to improve. But in a situation where someone is really depending on your throughput to get to the next step for their throughput, it makes you not dependable.
Oh, and related to every business, career, nonprofit, profit, anything you do, you better be reliable and
Right.
honest. Otherwise, nobody's going to work with you.
Right.
No matter how talented you might be.
So you went on to be, I think, 10 years in your career length, right? And give me the teams you played for.
I was drafted to the Denver Broncos, played there for 4 years, played with the Washington Redskins at the time, now Washington Commanders for 3 years. Had a cup of coffee with the Chicago Bears, and then 3 years with the Cleveland Browns.
And during that time, you and Katie, going back to husband, so you and Katie, she was with you throughout all of this, right? And so she moved around the country with you, and she's amazing. I really enjoy spending time with her. And in fact, don't take this the wrong way, but having Katie around, particularly when it's you and Katie, it's just so interesting to watch the dynamic, because you can tell that she's an incredible human being, but she doesn't let you get away with anything, and she keeps you in line. And I got to know, was she like that, like in the early days?
Oh yeah. So Katie and I met in high school. Started dating our senior year in high school, and like most high school sweethearts, we had our moments in college, right? Broke up once or twice. Broke up right before I went to the NFL. But yeah, she's amazing. She's my it's the love of my life. Couldn't imagine life without her. And the dumbest thing I could have done was to become a big shot, thinking I'm a big shot, NFL football player, and start looking for greener pastures beyond Katie. And I'm certainly glad I did not.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you guys then traveled the country. You lived in a variety of cities. You experienced a lot of things. There have to be lessons, people, things you learned during your NFL career that then started to shape your post-NFL thought process and kind of where you started to go, right? So beyond the games and the lights and the glitz, like, talk a little bit about really what are the things that being in the NFL started to shape for you, put into perspective for you, and those things that kind of have now kind of stuck with you throughout your post-NFL career.
I'm going to go back to Katie because this story always makes me laugh. I mean, have some self-awareness would be number one.
Okay.
So I was drafted to the Denver Broncos and got there right after they won their second Super Bowl. So 2 Super Bowls in a row. Names that most people, maybe not you, but most people would recognize. John Elway, Terrell Davis, Shannon Sharp, Ed McCaffrey, Rod Smith. I mean, I can go on and on. Just phenomenal football player.
Now, to be fair, a lot of these names I know, not because I knew them in the moment, but because I've talked to you enough over time to start to glean some of this. So I do know a lot of these names now. So
good. That's great. That's progress. And the only reason I'm bringing those names up is just phenomenal football players that any fan of the NFL would know. And I've got tremendous respect for those guys, all those guys I just named intentionally. But I show up to their ring ceremony. So they're getting their second Super Bowl NFL ring. And there's a bunch of guys on the team, guys I didn't mention that I have, again, tremendous respect for. But there's also a lot of guys that nobody ever heard of, right? Guys that were on the team that you and I wouldn't know. I probably wouldn't know if I saw their name today. And some of them were just like me, big, fat offensive linemen. And I've got a lot of great friends. I'm not talking about any of them. I'm talking about guys that, honestly, I probably wouldn't recognize anymore. But big, fat offensive linemen with bombshell girlfriends, straight out of Victoria's Secret model. And I'm not saying Katie is not. She's up there with them. I'm just making a comment that you look at these guys and you're like, really? Right? Like,
right.
You probably never dated someone like that in high school or college. You just got a second Super Bowl, and now you've got a Victoria's Secret model as a girlfriend or wife or whatever. And that always struck me as really odd because chances are that ain't going to last. And the reason I bring that up is know a little bit about yourself, right? And there's a lot of horror stories, and I don't mean it horror in the true term of horror, but a lot of stories where that didn't end well.
Yeah.
Right? And they let their fame and their notoriety allow them to make decisions that in the long term really didn't benefit them. So that was one that I just like, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
Like what are you guys doing? And if you're eyes wide open and saying, I'm just here for a good time, great, good for you. But there's a lot of guys that, got married and got divorced quickly after, lost half of their wealth, if there was any wealth left, for and I hate, I don't know what the proper term for what I'm communicating right now. I hate to be so negative at it, but just like, come on, guys. She's most likely not with you for you.
The self-awareness, I think, is extremely important. It manifests itself in that example, right? But there are other things, other places lack of self-awareness can manifest, right? And so I think that's a good example because it's obvious to everyone, right? Like you point out, like what is actually the glue for this, right? And it's really the person not understanding where their current lot in life has placed them, what things they truly value versus the things that they are expected to value, right? And so I think that's a valuable lesson, and that's a piece that is often overlooked. One of the things that I'm continually surprised about in talking to you is people who have now done extremely well financially because of their career, and not heeding advice or thinking about where this takes them tomorrow. And, and I think you've had lots and lots of stories of teammates, colleagues, folks that you knew who just didn't understand that it's not forever. And so you've got to plan for what happens later. And a lot of these folks were earning enough to not have to worry about their financial future if they paid attention to their today. And, it's just, that's not part of the self-awareness piece, but I do think that's another piece that I personally was not aware of until you started talking about some of the things that your teammates would be involved in, and some of the things that would happen off the field.
Yeah, and the story I gave was one that I just laugh at. It's probably not the best. I have a better one that I use in more examples when I'm talking to either current athletes or successful people that are talking about transitions. So you asked, what lessons learned from the NFL, and I can talk through a couple, all non-related to football, right? So, you walk in as a 22-year-old and you're handed a contract that is much more significant than you would have gotten in any other realm you're coming out of college in, right? So you're making more money now than 99.9% of 22-year-olds. At the time in the NFL, I think the minimum salary was about $400,000. I think it's now about $1 million. That's a lot of money.
Right.
And I was a second-round draft pick. I was the last pick of the second round. So I was making more than the minimum. I was making a good amount of money. And I'm in a locker room with a bunch of people that are making a good amount of money. And you're seeing people, well, so first off, the statistics were terrible. Don't quote me on the statistics, but say 50% of NFL athletes are broke within 4 years or something like that. And I'm in a locker room with a bunch of 22 to 30-year-olds that are making a ton of money by any measure and making terrible decisions with their money. And some decisions are obvious, some less so. And the decisions that are less obvious that are terrible decisions, which happens a lot, and it's exactly what I did, is you walk in the locker room, you find someone who appears to be successful, and you say, well, what do you do with your money? Right? I mean, that's how it goes. You're going to trust the people in the locker room more than just about anyone else because, one, they quickly become your friends.
Right.
You are, quote unquote, going to battle with them, and that's a terrible phrase because you're playing a game. But you're going through hard times and you're relying on one another, so you build great connections.
Sure.
And you go to that locker room and you say, well, what do you do with your money? That's probably the worst question you can ask if you follow their advice. Because you're surrounded by a bunch of 22 to 30-year-olds who are making money that they are just coming into, that they haven't had 30 years of experience of what to do with it. And they're probably just making decisions based on the same question they asked a few years before. What are you doing with your money? So what most athletes do is they go with a financial advisor that has other athletes.
Okay.
That's number one. And I think going with a financial advisor is probably the best thing most athletes can do. But deciding which financial advisor is really, really important. And from my experience, if you're going with a financial advisor that's got nothing but other athletes, they're a pretty terrible financial advisor.
Fantastic point.
So why do they only have athletes, which by definition I'm included, are 22 to 30-year-olds who don't know shit about finance or money or anything?
Add that to the list of things that that I never really thought about, but makes total sense.
It's terrible. I think there's more registered NFL financial advisors and agents than there are athletes in the NFL. So that's terrible. And the NFL tries to do, and I'm not dogging on the NFL at all. The NFL and the NFLPA, the parents of the NFL, the unions of the NFL, they're trying to do a good job educating athletes, but their hands are tied to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they can't tell an athlete, go to this guy or not go to that guy.
Yeah.
They can't do that.
Right.
They can make the financial advisors register and take tests and all that, which they do. But still, athletes have a tendency to go with what other athletes are doing, and that's a terrible mistake. If I could tell any athlete that's falling into new money, find a financial advisor that's got a bunch of old money. That has been investing for people that are in business for a long time, that have got a long history of success. You're going to be better off.
Wow. Okay.
So that was one of the first lessons.
Okay.
And in the beginning, I did exactly what every other athlete does. I took all my money and gave it to a financial advisor that other athletes had. And to be fair, the financial advisor was honest and competent, but also charged 3%, which was 3x more than any other financial advisor should. And this will be, I don't know if we're going to pull the string much during the conversation, but I hate not knowing, right? So I knew nothing of investing, right? I was, quote unquote, highly educated, 2 middle-class parents. I had every reason to be knowledgeable of most things, and I had zero knowledge, right? I wasn't a business major. Zero knowledge. I hated that feeling. I hate the fact that I'm making more money now than I'll probably make for the rest of my life, and I really don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I needed to fix that.
Yeah. And it really does tie to your post-NFL work, right? Because and what you decided to do education-wise and a lot of the work you've done post the league,
Absolutely.
right, are all tied to that.
All tied to that.
Yeah.
But tied to other things, meaning one of the best things you can be as a human being is curious.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not enough curiosity a lot of times. So I didn't know anything about finance or investing. And I'm hearing all these guys in the locker room with different ideas and what they're doing. And most of it is just handing money to someone else. I was like, I really don't like not knowing. So I'm going to start to know. And the way you know is ask questions, pick up books. So more important than just asking questions. So asking questions of people that you don't know if are knowledgeable or not is dangerous.
Yeah.
But ask the questions.
Yeah.
But then look up experts.
That's right.
So I began doing a lot of reading. Read all kinds of finance books, started reading the Wall Street Journal business section, investing section, cover to cover. Read a book called A Random Walk Down Wall Street and became convinced that you can do a lot of this on your own and get a better return, much safer than going with financial advisors, basically indexing. And that's where my journey began on finance and investing. But a small side path. My parents ran that summer camp for underprivileged kids.
Yep.
That summer camp had a board of very old money, like very old New York real estate money, lots of money. And I asked my dad, and I said, this is after I began educating myself. I was like, Dad, I think I'm going to leave my financial advisor. So I'm looking for another financial advisor. I was thinking about doing it on my own.
Yeah.
And my dad goes, well, the board has a lot of great financial advisors.
And if people have been paying attention, we didn't talk about when your birthday is or mine, but if you kind of think about when your career was and start timelining this out, you can start to put together the puzzle pieces about who may have been involved on this board. So,
yep, some very big time successful people. But we'll find out if it's where you think you're going. So where I'm going. So my dad said, you know what? Let me speak to them. Because at this point, I'm making real money. My parents made a great living, but I'm making more money in 1 year than they make in 3 or 4 at this point. And he said, let me speak to them and see if one of their financial advisors speak to you. So My dad comes back and said, you know what? Most of them go to this one guy, and he guarantees 15% a year. And they've been with him for years. 15% a year, no matter what the stock market does, good times, bad times, he's guaranteeing 15% a year. And this is where education matters, because at this point, I've read enough to know that investing is really hard and really inconsistent, right? So you might average 10% over 30 years, but every year you're not 10%. One year you're up 20, next year you're down 5. And that's Warren Buffett. That's the best, the best. And I remember looking at him and I said, there's no way. Like, I've just begun researching this, but there's no way that is the case. That's impossible.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, don't worry about it. You don't make enough money to invest with this guy anyway. So I did end up leaving my financial advisor, went to another financial advisor who was very good. And I did do my research and I had a lot of business clients, and he was good, and stayed with him for a small amount of time. But then have since, for the past 20-something years, been doing all my own investments. But yes, to your point, the financial advisor was Bernie Madoff.
Yeah. That's where my brain goes, right? Because like I'm putting together kind of the timeline and having known a little bit about just the geography that some of the folks that your parents may have been able to have on the board or be in contact with, it just starts to fit. And so knowing nothing, that's who I would say that your dad was suggesting that you talk to, but hey, you didn't have enough money to invest with him anyway.
Yep, that's exactly right. So the sad part of that is you had a lot of family wealth that got destroyed by Bernie Madoff. But the next derivative of that is Camp Camus got significantly impacted by that. I mean, you're talking about guys that would write a $100,000 check to support Camp Camus, and that
not able to do so.
Not able to do so.
We talked about the decision trees, the decision process, like unable to predict. You missed out on the stellar record when you chose to go to Duke, but you did not choose to get involved with Bernie, and so sometimes it can go either way, right?
That's right, and I would say I missed out on a stellar record for a few years at Northwestern, but Duke was by far the best decisions I could have made.
And I would agree with that, just based on like as you start to think about how things actually worked out for you.
Oh, and even beyond that, take the football away, or take the football success away. I'm on a group chat with 30 to 40 guys that I played with at Duke. Just great people, great friends.
That's amazing.
Oh,
amazing,
unbelievable. And I'll prop up Duke a little bit here. Of those 30 or 40 guys, there's probably 10 doctors. There's many of them are highly successful in whatever career path they chose. I mean, we didn't win a lot of football games, but I wouldn't trade those guys, my friends, for anything, because football is a minute.
Yeah, and I said it in the beginning, but I'll say it again. Like, I think I've been most impressed as I've gotten to know you at how important football and your football career has been, but how much perspective you have around that part of your life relative to the other things that you've done. And so while I promise that we are going to get together and we're going to talk a lot about the football stories, because there's a lot of stories during that 10-year period that I think are both inspirational but also kind of funny, and I learned a lot. So just for people listening, I know very little about sports in general, but you have spent time trying to get me to understand. And so that's why it's funny when you go, you'll give a name and I'll go, oh, I remember that. Or you'll give a position and you'll see me like mentally calculate where is that, because we spent that time trying to get me up to speed. We're going to have a chance and we're going to talk about that at some point. Where I want to go for the next few minutes is you finished your NFL career and you made a decision to go back from an educational perspective. we know that maybe the impetus was really trying to understand a lot more about the business and financial world, but that it had lots of repercussions, and there's been lots of entrepreneurial opportunities. There's been lots of businesses. You've done a lot with real estate. So can we talk a little bit about that post NFL education and where that's taken you?
Yeah, yeah. I think I do want to tie one non-football football story into that
Yeah.
because it is important. When I was in Denver, they did a game day magazine for all home games, and they would take an athlete and interview them. Just a handful of questions for the fans to get to know athletes better. And I would read those game day magazines because it's interesting to see what your teammates say, and you learn a lot. And this goes back to have a little bit of self-awareness. And it maybe self-awareness is the wrong term, but have a little bit of general awareness, right? And they'd ask these questions, really simple questions. Where are you from? What's your favorite food? Where'd you play in college? Like all stuff that anybody can pick up, find anywhere, right? That's all nice. But the best question is they would ask, what would you be doing if you weren't playing in the NFL?
Oh,
Best question they have.
excellent. Yeah.
And the answers, in my opinion, show why athletes struggle so much post their careers. Because 9 times out of 10, the answer was something that was very low probability of ever occurring. Example. Well, if I wasn't playing in the NFL, I'd be the NBA. Really? If I wasn't playing in the NFL, I'd be a professional golfer. If I wasn't in the NFL, I would have my own record label. If I wasn't in the NFL, I'd have a clothing line. All those answers assume that because you excel at one thing, you're automatically going to be able to excel at another. And I don't just mean excel in everyday terms. I mean elite.
Truly excel. Yeah.
Elite.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most revealing questions that they asked athletes, and shows, in my opinion, why athletes often go broke and often struggle after their careers. Because in their minds, they're like, I'm 25 years old and I'm one of the best in the world at what I do. Of course, I can be one of the best in the world at this other thing. And what they discount is, and let's take the University of Alabama. If you were a good enough high school football player to go to the University of Alabama, you were elite, right? So you had to train and work and show skills that made you so attractive to one of the best football colleges of all time. And then when you went there, you worked your butt off every single day against others that were the best at what they did. And then from there, you went to the NFL and had to work so that is I'll get the term wrong, a long period of time where you practiced and harnessed your skill against the best there is out there.
Yeah.
Right? That's what led to you being where you are in the NFL. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to transition to the NBA where those guys have been doing the same thing in a completely different venue, or a clothing line, or a musician, or whatever it is, without the 20 years that you put into your current profession. That is completely unrealistic. And what guys do is they take that lack of awareness and say, well, I'm going to put all my chips in on a record label. Or I'm going to put all my chips into real estate, even though I haven't spent 20 years figuring out what real estate is. And they make huge mistakes with all the money they just made.
It's hard for me to, in my mind, reconcile that thought process, right? Because part of me thinks in answering that question, maybe they're thinking, had I chosen another path, I could have been successful at being in the NBA like I was in NFL. I would have dedicated that time to basketball. I would have ended up being elite in basketball, and I would not have been good at football. I made a choice to be a football player. That's part of what I think. And then the other part of me is exactly where you are, in that the assumption is, because I am fantastic at this thing that I do, it will be relatively easy for me to transition to be incredible at this other thing because I want to do it, right? And you haven't had the experience in knowing these guys on a different level. It's extremely interesting for me to hear it like that, and to actually think that a person could wrap their brain around that in that manner, right? And say, I am fantastic at this. That makes me just fantastic in general. And should I decide that I'm not going to do this, I'm going to go and do this other thing and be just as good at that.
Right. And even if you take the first part you talked about, where maybe they're thinking, well, not if I wasn't playing today, what I'd be doing, but what if I rewound my life and started again, what I would be doing? Still think about that. Let's go back to my story of basketball.
Yeah.
Like, that was my passion.
Yeah.
I became an NFL offensive lineman for 10 years. I would have never gone past high school basketball. There are a few guys, Deion Sanders, one of them, who I have tremendous amount of respect for, that could do two sports, but not many.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was gonna be my next point, is that if it were easy to make that transition from superstardom at one sport to superstardom at another sport, we would have more people who do that, right? And we don't.
No, and even to your first very good point, even if it was about starting from the beginning, would Mike Tyson been an NFL football player because he was a great boxer? Would Usain Bolt been a wide receiver just because he was fast? There's lots of fast guys.
Yeah.
Right. So to assume that even if you could rewind history, that you're just that gifted of an athlete, because those are very different sports.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is a sign of arrogance and hubris, which is needed to be a great athlete, especially a 22-year-old, but has consequences.
Yeah.
So with that story in mind, I did not suffer from that type of arrogance. Katie will tell you I have plenty of arrogance, but I didn't suffer from that type of arrogance. And I said, I do enjoy finance, and I do enjoy investing. And I know enough that I don't know that much. So I need to continue my education. And that was my decision to go back to business school.
Yeah. And what's come out of that is that you've been involved at different levels in a number of businesses. And I've gotten just a small peek at some of the things that you've been involved in. And it's been kind of interesting just to see the different industry and to kind of see your seat in those particular businesses. And as we began the conversation today, we talked about where you are, where you sit today. And, being in healthcare, it's just really interesting for me to think about the opportunity that you guys are exploring and really are the need you're filling. And so I don't know how much about your current company you want to talk about, but I do think that looking at human healthcare and the instrumentation that is used, and the speed at which technology changes, and the fact that we as humans, we are still very much related to all of the other mammals out there, as an example, that there are times when things are cross compatible. As an eye doctor, there are lots of things that we use to treat human eyes that can also work as eardrops and other types of things that you use on the animal population. And so this venture is just, I think, is pretty amazing. So now I've talked about it enough that people are like, what are you talking about? So I hope you can share a little bit about what you're doing these days.
Yeah, I'd love to. But I also want to caveat that I have the great honor of being part of the company, but I by no means started or invented this company.
This is fair. Yes.
Yeah, so I want to make that clear. So a neighbor of mine and a friend for, probably 12 or 13 years is a guy by the name Les Meadowcroft. And very relatable to the conversation we've been having, Les became an expert in med device sales.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So from college, he went to Johnson & Johnson, then went to a company called Intuitive, and spent 20 to 30 years becoming an absolute expert in human minimally invasive surgery. Okay. So again, 20 to 30 years, right? And one day he had to take his dog into a vet for a relatively simple procedure on the human side. And the veterinarian, who was a very talented veterinarian, didn't have some of the very simple devices on the human side that had been around for 30 or 40 years that Les was selling to diagnose his pet.
Mm-hmm.
And Les is like, well, this is crazy. I can go get one and bring it here, an old one, bring it here, and I'll show you how to do it so you can look what's going on in my dog. That's what he did. And he had a very, very smart and entrepreneurial vet that he was able to work with. And he began showing him some of just the basic endoscopic technology, laparoscopic technology that's been around, again, for 30 years in the human space that wasn't in the vet space. That was like a rocket ship in the vet space. And the vet's like, this is phenomenal. I can do so many things with this. And that was just a spark. That's all the spark that Les needed after 30 years of being an expert salesman in minimally invasive surgery to say, you know what? There might be an opportunity here in the vet space. And back to the athletes that think, you were great at one thing, all of a sudden you can be great at another. He was a great minimally invasive surgery salesperson, right? A med device. He was phenomenal in it. But he never started a company before. He never ran a company. So unlike what a lot of athletes do to get in trouble, he didn't put all his chips on the table. He's like, all right, let's start with this, right? Let me see what equipment I can get, go speak to some vets, speak to some people that are experts in the field. We happen to be near North Carolina State, which is a phenomenal veterinary university, and spoke to some of those professionals and went into it slowly. And over 10 years, built a phenomenal company that he asked me to help lead about 15, 16 months ago. So I am now the COO and CFO of Vetovation Incorporated. And yes, the connection with the human side is amazing. I mean, at the end of the day, our four-legged friends, right? Cats, dogs, for the most part, they have two eyes. Humans have two eyes. They have a heart. They have a liver. They have lungs. They have intestines. They have feet and hands, any way you want to describe them. And a lot of the surgeries and medical instrumentation that's been working on humans for years and years and years can have the same impact on the pets. Better outcomes for the patients, more opportunities for the vet hospitals to expand their care, just phenomenal connection. And honestly, one of those things that once you hear about it, you're like, well, of course.
Right.
And those are the best entrepreneurial ideas.
Yeah. When you really think about the nuts and bolts, very similar builds, very similar, all the similar parts, right? And the thought that what we use for people continues to advance, but what we use for our animal friends doesn't do the same. We're basically taking those instruments out of commission. Could we not repurpose those instruments instead and really continue to give world-class care to our animal friends? And so I think it's a great idea. It's for me a great company because it's doing not just interesting and innovative work, but good work. And so I wish you guys all the best with that. And I'm excited to kind of see what you do with it, because you always have something interesting or different to add to the mix. So it's we've been talking about the new headquarters and you guys doing all of the work there, and so very exciting.
Yeah, it's a great company. Les has started something really special. I'm glad to be part of it.
So Lennie, we've had a good amount of time together. I think we've talked about a number of things. What is it that I haven't asked you today that we really should talk about?
Yeah, so I want to go back to the introduction where I said husband, father, son, and someone who's engaged in life.
Yeah.
I intentionally didn't say anything about football. And that's important because I don't care who the athlete, well, there's some athletes that transcend, a few years, but if all that I was ever known for was that I was an athlete, that's not a life well lived.
Yeah.
And I made it to the elite level In the elite level, I was very average, right? I've got friends that were elite in the elite level, great friends. I know many more friends that were far better than me in the NFL than I ever was. But even them, if all they're known for is that they were athletes at one time in their life, they wasted a lot of opportunity. Not wasted their life, I don't certainly mean that, but they
Sure.
wasted a lot of opportunity. So one day I will no longer be on this earth. And I hope I am known much more for being a husband, a father, a son, and someone who was engaged in their life and engaged in their community. And I do a lot of stuff outside of my work. I hope that's what I'm known for. And if no one ever brings up again that I played football, so be it.
You know, it's hard to thank you enough for spending the time. I think that you add so much to anything you participate in. And when I asked you if you'd sit down and do this experiment with me, you did not hesitate and said, absolutely, let's talk. And I think if people are listening to the points that you've made, some of them are, I think, things people don't really think about at a high level. And if they were to focus a little bit on some of those thoughts, I think we could be just better in general. And for anyone who is developing a career or making decisions about where they want to be, I think hearing the experience and really the realism about the way you should think about your passions and your talents and how to apply those things in a way that brings you success. And ultimately, it really does play into how you feel about your accomplishments and how you feel about what you've done in life. And so I hope we get to sit down and do this again, because there's a few details in that NFL career, I think, are some of them are just fantastic, and I would love to talk about some of that. But we continue to change and evolve over time, and so there's no way we could hit on everything in a single conversation. And so I welcome you back in the future to do this again.
Well, Artis, you're a great friend, and I would love to do more talks with you. What I truly enjoy most about you and our friendship is you're curious, right? You are exceptional in your field, but now you're trying podcasts. You love cars. You love motorcycles. You and I talk a lot about health and fitness. I hope more people in the world are curious like you are.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, curiosity is one of those things I cannot escape. And so I feel like in this podcast series, we're just going to talk about a lot of things, and it may come across as just a collection of random thoughts. But I think if you really pay attention and draw the thread, you'll see that there's just a lot about the world that if you know a little bit about, you may decide that you want to know a lot about it.
That's right.
All right, Lennie. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of what's left of the weekend, and I look forward to talking to you soon.